Snow was falling softly outside Linda Parker's window, covering the small Ohio town in silence. She sat at her kitchen table, tracing her finger over a faded photograph of her daughter. 10 years of distance and one heavy choice separated them. The coffee had gone cold, like everything else that once felt warm. That morning, she decided she could no longer live inside her regrets. Linda packed only what fit in one small suitcase: a few clothes, a map, and a letter her daughter had written long ago. Her hands trembled as she locked the door. Unsure if she would ever return, the car groaned as it started, the old engine coughing in protest. She whispered to herself, "Please, just take me there." The words were both a prayer and a promise. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, blanketed in white. The world felt asleep, and Linda wondered if it was waiting for her to wake up too. Her breath fogged the windshield, the heater barely keeping pace with the cold. For a long time, she didn't turn on the radio. She wanted to hear the sound of her own fear. Every mile she drove seemed to pull her deeper into her past. Images flashed through her mind: her daughter's angry face, the slamming door, the echo of words that could not be taken back. The silence in the car was thick, heavy with what was never said. Linda bit her lip to stop the tears that kept threatening to fall. At sunset, she pulled over by an empty field. The horizon glowed pink against the snow. She stood there, shivering, staring into the vastness ahead. "I'm coming," she whispered, though she didn't know if it was to her daughter or to the woman she used to be. The journey had begun. The road was a ribbon of ice, shimmering under the pale morning sun. Linda drove slowly, gripping the wheel with both hands. The sound of the tires crunching over frozen snow was the only thing keeping her company. She hadn't spoken aloud in hours, afraid her own voice might break the fragile peace inside her chest. She thought about turning back. The idea came and went like the passing signs on the highway. But something stronger pushed her forward, a quiet hope that forgiveness might still exist at the end of this endless white. Her daughter's name, Emily, echoed softly in her mind, like a prayer she was afraid to say too loudly. A rest stop appeared on the side of the road, the lights flickering in the cold. She parked and stepped out, the air biting her face. Inside, a few travelers sat with their heads down, lost in their own roads. Linda ordered a coffee, holding the paper cup close to her chest as if warmth could seep through memories. She stared out the window, watching snowflakes drift past the glass. Everything outside seemed still, too still. In that silence, she heard the sound of her own guilt whispering. It told her she waited too long, that it was already too late. Linda closed her eyes and whispered back, "Not yet." When she returned to the car, a bird landed on the hood, shaking off snow. It looked straight at her, fearless. Linda smiled faintly. For the first time in years, she felt something fragile but real, the smallest spark of courage. By midday, the clouds darkened, and the wind grew stronger. Linda's car struggled up a steep hill before she finally stopped at a lonely gas station in Indiana. The old neon sign buzzed weakly, half-lit, like a heartbeat fading. She stepped out, stretching her stiff legs, her breath forming white ghosts in the air. Inside, the smell of gasoline and cheap coffee mixed in the air. The clerk behind the counter was an older man with kind eyes. "Cold one, huh?" he said, handing her a cup of steaming coffee. His voice carried the warmth the heater didn't. Linda nodded, her lips too numb for words. They talked quietly. He told her about losing his son in an accident years ago. "Took me a long time to forgive myself," he said, staring at nothing. "But life doesn't wait for you to be ready." His words hit something deep inside her. She looked down, tears pooling before she could stop them. He didn't ask why she cried. He simply placed a napkin on the counter and nodded. It was the kind of silence that understood everything. Linda smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. And for a moment, she felt seen. When she stepped back into the cold, the snow had stopped. A weak sun broke through the clouds, touching the wet asphalt like hope reborn. Linda took a deep breath and said softly, "Maybe I'm not as lost as I thought." The next night, a storm rolled in from the north. Winds howled against the car as Linda searched desperately for shelter. A flickering motel sign appeared like a lighthouse in the blizzard. She pulled in, heart pounding, as snow piled against the tires. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old memories. She wrapped herself in a blanket and sat by the window, watching the storm consume the world outside. The sound of the wind was like voices, angry, relentless, demanding to be heard. She thought of the day her daughter left, the fight, the final words neither forgave. Regret gnawed at her like hunger. From her bag, she pulled out an old photograph, Emily at 6 years old. smiling, missing her front teeth. Linda traced her face with a trembling finger. "Where did I go wrong?" she whispered. Her voice broke. It wasn't a question to be answered, only one to be carried. She began writing a letter in the dim light, her hand shaking. Words flowed, raw and uneven. "I was scared. I was proud. I didn't know how to love you right." When she finished, she stared at the page, then tore it in half. The pieces fluttered to the floor like snowflakes. She sat in silence for a long time, the lamp flickering beside her. Outside, the storm softened, as if tired. Linda closed her eyes, whispering, "Tomorrow, I'll try again tomorrow." And for once, that felt like enough. The storm left behind a world wrapped in white silence. Linda's car refused to start, no matter how many times she turned the key. She sat back, defeated, until a rumbling sound broke the quiet. A semi-truck pulling into the lot. The driver stepped out, tall and rugged, with a tired kindness in his eyes. "You need a hand?" he asked. She nodded, embarrassed but grateful. He managed to get the car running, then offered her a ride up the next stretch of road. "Safer that way," he said. Linda hesitated, then agreed. Inside the truck, the heater blasted warm air, filling the cab with life again. They drove for hours, mostly in silence. His name was Jack. He spoke little but with weight, sharing bits of his story. A wife who left, a son he hadn't seen in years. Linda listened, recognizing her own pain reflected in a stranger. Sometimes, she thought maybe all travelers carried the same wound when they stopped for gas. Jack reached into his coat and handed her a small silver coin on a string. "My wife said it was for luck," he said. "Never worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you." Linda laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar on her lips. "Maybe it already did," she replied. As they parted ways at dusk, Jack waved from the truck window. Linda held the coin tightly, feeling its cool weight in her palm. The road stretched on, endless and uncertain, but for the first time, she didn't fear it. She was learning how to move forward. The next morning, Linda drove through miles of empty road until she reached a small town, frozen in time. Snow covered the rooftops, the streets silent except for the hum of her engine. The town's only diner glowed faintly with a neon open sign. She parked outside, shivering, as the wind pushed against her coat. Inside, warmth and the smell of pancakes greeted her like an old friend. Behind the counter, a woman named Martha smiled kindly. "You look like you've been on the road a while," she said. Linda nodded, wrapping her hands around a steaming cup of coffee. The heat reached places she didn't know were cold. Martha talked as she cooked, telling stories about the people who never left town. "Some of us get stuck here," she said, flipping a pancake. "Others keep driving until they find what they lost." Linda listened, realizing she didn't know which kind she was, maybe both. When she finished eating, she asked for the bill, but Martha waved her off. "On the house," she said. "Sometimes people just need a warm meal more than a full tank." Linda smiled, her eyes misting. She whispered, "Thank you." Feeling the sincerity ripple through her chest, that as she stepped outside, the wind had calmed. A faint sun glimmered through the clouds. Linda looked back at the diner's window, seeing her reflection in the glass. Tired, older, but alive. For the first time, she didn't see a woman running from the past. She saw one searching for grace. The road stretched like a ribbon of quiet silver under a pale sky. Linda drove in silence, her thoughts loud enough to fill the car. Words she never said to her daughter tumbled through her mind, all the apologies left unsent. She began to whisper them softly, as if Emily could somehow hear. "I should have listened," she said to the empty seat beside her. "I was too proud to say I was scared." Her voice cracked. The admission felt like opening a door she had long kept locked. The car heater hummed, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time, her own voice didn't sound like a stranger's thought. As miles passed, something inside began to shift. She stopped seeing the road as punishment and started seeing it as prayer. Each curve was a confession, each mile an act of courage. The world outside blurred into white, but inside, a light began to stir. A song came on the radio, an old tune from the years before everything fell apart. Linda sang along, her voice trembling but clear. The lyrics spoke of home and forgiveness. By the end, tears streamed down her face, but she kept singing. It felt like healing. When the song ended, she turned the volume down and whispered, "I'm coming home, Emily." The words filled the small space like sunlight breaking through clouds. For once, Linda didn't doubt if her daughter would forgive her. She just hoped she could forgive herself. Late that afternoon, flashing lights appeared ahead, a blockade across the highway. A worker waved her down, shouting through the snow, "Roads closed. Landslide ahead." Linda's stomach tightened. The detour would take hours, maybe days, but she nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you," she said, and turned the wheel. The new route wound through narrow roads and dense forests. The GPS lost signal, and soon, so did her phone. The silence was heavy, pressing on her chest like a weight. Every sign of civilization disappeared, replaced by endless white and the hum of uncertainty. Fear whispered to her again, "You shouldn't have come alone." But another voice rose, quiet and steady, one she hadn't heard in years. "You're stronger than you think." Linda gripped the steering wheel, letting that thought anchor her. The road ahead curved sharply, leading into the unknown. At dusk, she stopped near a frozen river. The reflection of the sky shimmered in the ice, pink, blue, and gold. It looked fragile but beautiful, like her own heart. She stepped out, breathing the cold air until her lungs burned. It reminded her she was alive. That night, she slept in the car, wrapped in blankets, her breath misting in the air. The coin Jack had given her hung from the mirror, catching the faint light of the moon. Linda touched it and whispered, "Maybe this was the road I was meant to find." By morning, the car's fuel gauge hovered near empty. Panic fluttered in her chest as the miles stretched endlessly ahead. Just when she thought she'd have to stop, a small wooden sign appeared, "Community shelter to 2 miles." Relief made her laugh out loud, her voice echoing inside the car. The shelter was a warm blur of noise and kindness. Volunteers served soup, children played, and old coats hung on racks. Linda stepped inside, exhausted but grateful. A gray-haired woman named Ruth noticed her immediately. "You look like someone who's been searching," she said, eyes kind but knowing. They talked over bowls of stew. Ruth listened more than she spoke, her silence comforting. "Finally," she said, "sometimes, God doesn't give us shortcuts. He gives us time." The words sank into Linda's bones, soft and heavy. She hadn't realized how long she'd been rushing toward forgiveness. That night, Ruth offered her a cot near the window. Linda lay awake, watching the snowdrift outside. She thought of Emily, where she might be, what she might be feeling. For the first time, she didn't imagine anger in her daughter's face. She imagined hope. As sleep finally came, Linda felt something ease inside her. Maybe the journey wasn't about reaching her daughter. Maybe it was about learning to walk beside her pain without fear. Outside, the wind carried her dreams north. The next morning, Ruth handed Linda a notebook and said, "Write what your heart can't say out loud." The pages were blank, waiting. Linda hesitated, then began. Her handwriting was shaky at first, but soon the words flowed like a river thawing after winter. She wrote about the night of the fight, about fear disguised as anger. She wrote about loneliness, pride, and the silence that followed. Then she wrote about love, the kind that never really dies, even when buried under years of regret. Each sentence felt like a small resurrection. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept writing. "I should have said I was proud of you," she wrote. "I should have stayed." Her heart pounded with every truth she put on paper. When she finished, her hands trembled, but her chest felt light. The letter was both confession and release. She read it aloud to Ruth, her voice breaking halfway through. The older woman smiled gently. "That's not a letter," she said. "That's a bridge." Linda folded the paper carefully and placed it in her coat pocket. She knew what she had to do next. As she stepped outside, the wind was sharp but clean. The sky stretched wide and blue, like forgiveness itself. Linda whispered, "I'm ready." For the first time since she left home, the road ahead didn't feel endless. It felt open. The sky darkened early that evening as Linda crossed into Montana. Her hands ached from hours of driving, but she pressed on. Hunger and exhaustion gnawed at her. So she pulled into a small roadside restaurant glowing with neon light. Inside, the warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. A young waitress approached, smiling kindly. "Coffee?" she asked. Linda nodded, her heart catching in her throat when she saw the name tag, Emily. The name hit her like a whisper from the past. Her eyes stung, and she forced a smile, afraid her voice might betray her. They talked briefly. The girl mentioned saving money to move to Alaska, the same destination Linda was heading for. Fate seemed to smile at her, soft and bittersweet. "It's a long road," Linda said quietly, "but it's worth every mile." The girl's smile reminded her of her daughters. When the meal ended, Linda almost reached into her pocket for the letter. Her fingers brushed the paper, trembling, but she hesitated. This wasn't her Emily, and yet, it felt like a message from the universe. Some moments weren't meant to finish. They were meant to prepare. As she left, the girl called out, "Good luck on your journey." Linda turned and smiled. "You too," she said, voice thick with emotion. Outside, the night air was sharp, but she felt strangely warm. The world was gently pushing her forward. The next day, the car began to sputter again. The dashboard lights flickered, warning of trouble. Linda cursed softly, pulling over to the side of the icy road. Snow fell in heavy flakes, each one landing like a reminder of how small she was against the world's vastness. She stepped out and kicked at the tire, frustration spilling over. "Come on," she shouted into the wind. The silence swallowed her cry. Her breath came fast, fogging in front of her face. Then, suddenly, the anger cracked open, and she began to cry, loud and unrestrained, her sobs echoing in the emptiness. When the tears finally stopped, Linda sank to her knees, exhausted. Snowflakes melted on her skin, cooling the heat of her grief. And then, through the silence, she laughed. A trembling, broken laugh that somehow felt free. She realized that she wasn't angry at the car. She was angry at herself for waiting so long to live again. A distant engine rumbled. A farmer in an old truck pulled up, leaning out the window. "Need help?" he asked. Linda nodded, still catching her breath. He fixed the engine with quiet skill and no questions asked. When she tried to pay, he simply smiled. "Just keep going," he said. As he drove away, Linda stood in the snow, holding her heart as if afraid it might burst. The world was cold, but she no longer felt alone. Sometimes, she thought, help arrives when you finally stopped pretending you don't need it. Days later, Linda crossed into Alaska. The landscape was breathtaking, mountains rising like guardians, pine trees heavy with snow. Her heart beat faster with every mile. When she finally saw the sign for her daughter's town, her hands began to tremble. The end of the road was in sight. She parked on a quiet street, staring at a small blue house surrounded by frozen trees. Her pulse thundered in her ears. In the window, faint light flickered, proof of life and of time passing without her. She sat still for minutes that felt like hours, too afraid to move. She imagined every possible reaction: anger, rejection, silence, hope. Her chest ached with the weight of all of them. "What if she doesn't want me here?" she whispered. The question floated into the cold air, unanswered but necessary. Finally, she stepped out, clutching the letter in one hand. Her boots crunched on the snow, each step heavier than the last. The smell of pine mixed with her own trembling breath. When she reached the porch, she froze. Her hand hovered over the door, shaking uncontrollably. Then, before she could knock, the door opened. A shadow moved inside. A woman stood in the doorway, familiar eyes, older, but still her daughter's. Emily stared, disbelief softening into something unspoken. Neither moved. The world held its breath. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The snow kept falling, soft and endless. Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. Linda felt her knees weaken, her breath shallow. The letter slipped from her hand and landed soundlessly in the snow. She whispered, "Hi." Emily blinked, her eyes glistening. "Mom." The word cracked in the air, fragile and full of years. Linda nodded, tears streaming freely now. She didn't try to speak again. There were no words large enough to bridge that distance, so she stepped forward instead. The first touch was hesitant, almost fearful. Then Emily's arms tightened around her, and Linda let go of every apology she'd rehearsed. The cold between them melted in seconds. They stood there, clinging to each other, as if afraid that forgiveness might vanish if they let go. No one said, "I'm sorry." No one needed to. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of everything that had been waiting to be heard. The snow swirled around them like blessing and absolution combined. But when they finally stepped inside, the warmth of the house felt unreal. Pictures lined the walls, a life Linda had missed, but one still open to her now. She turned to Emily, who smiled through tears. "You came a long way," she said softly. Linda nodded. "So did you." Sunlight poured through the frosted window the next morning. Linda woke to the smell of coffee brewing and the quiet hum of life returning. Emily sat at the kitchen table, reading the letter Linda had dropped the night before. She looked up, eyes soft. "You wrote this for me?" she asked. Linda nodded, unsure if she could speak. Emily reached across the table, taking her hand. "You don't need to say anything," she said. "You already did." The words broke something open inside Linda. Not pain this time, but peace. She smiled, her tears quiet and warm. Outside, the snow sparkled under the early light. The world looked the same, yet everything had changed. The road that once seemed endless now led, right here, to forgiveness, to love, to home. Linda breathed deeply, letting the moment settle inside her like sunlight after storm. Later, as Emily dozed on the couch, Linda poured 2 cups of coffee. The sound of wind brushed softly against the windows, whispering memories of the long road behind her. She didn't regret the miles anymore. Each one had carried her closer to this peace. She stood by the window, watching the world awaken. The mountains stood silent, strong, eternal. Linda whispered to herself, the greatest distance was never between states. It was between my heart and courage. And finally, she had arrived.